And
Okay, go.
and a Chanukah Sameach to everybody. Sata D'Shemaya. So it's interesting if we look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Laws, on the laws of Hanukkah, we find that basically they all talk about the oil. It talks about not having a hesped during these days. It talks about having an extra sudah. Tells us what types of oils could be used, where to light it, etc. The focus over here is about the oils and the candles and lighting it, etc. One loses obviously the big picture. If it wasn't for the Mishnah Berurah that gives in his introduction about what exactly we're talking about over here in Hanukkah, about the wars and the religious freedom of the Jewish people to worship, then really we would be not really knowing what's going on over here. So if we look at the earlier sources that take place, that actually took place during the time, we see something very interesting. For instance, if I open up the book of the Maccabees, the book of the Maccabees, which obviously was written at the time when this took place, or maybe a few years afterwards, tells nothing about Nes Pach Hashemen that took place that everyone is so familiar with today. But there it talks about the wars, and it talks about going up to Yerushalayim and rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash and cleaning it up. It actually is an interesting side note that it tells us about an 8-day holiday that the Jews took place at that time, of a tashlum for Chag HaSukkot, which they were unable to do during its proper time in Tishrei. And there, the book of the Maccabees tells us that for 8 days they celebrated the holiday of the booths, the Chag HaSukkot, which is obviously some 2 months after when it's listed in the Torah. Being that that's said over here, if we look at another source, which obviously is something that we say every day now in our tefillot of Al Nisim, once again, we don't see anything about Pach Hashemen, the great miracle of the oil. But what we see over there is about the wars, about the few over the many, about the tahor over the tahor over the tamei, and they entered into the Beis Hamikdash and they lit the menorah that was there. Once again, the Pach Hashemen is left out. Years later, Josephus Flavius, who lived at the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, which is approximately 200 years after when these events unfolded, tells us also very similar to the book of Maccabees about the wars and about the great celebration that the Jews had at the time for 8 days. They celebrated the rededication of the Mikdash and the rebuilding of the Mizbeach. Not one word in Josephus's book, the war against the Jews, is not listed anything about the mitzvah, the nes of Pach Hashemen, which everyone is so familiar when it comes to the holiday of Hanukkah. In fact, he brings down over there, he calls this the festival of lights. The festival of lights, meaning the festival of freedom of worship, which was taken away from the Jewish people. Another source, approximately about the same time, is the Megillah Ta'anit. Megillah Ta'anit lists some 35 different dates when miracles occurred to the Jewish people, and it was forbidden to fast during those period of times. We don't keep any of those holidays anymore, except for Hanukkah and Purim, obviously. So there in Megillah Ta'anit, interesting enough, he does mention the idea of Pach Hashemen, which lasted for many days. But he only listed as a side note. Most of his thrust over there in Megillah Ta'anit is talking about the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, which took place for 8 days, the rebuilding of the Mizbeach, and he wants to know over there why in the time of the Mishkan, in the time of Shlomo Melech, it was only for 7 days the dedication, and why over here is for 8 days. He doesn't answer that. But if you look at the other Rishonim, the Rokach and the Ozarua, they do talk about it, and once again they write that it's the Mizbeach that was being rebuilt that took them for many days to be rebuilt. That took them a week to rebuild it, and then they celebrated on the 8th day. They don't mention anything about Pach Hashemen either. The last source that I'm going to talk about is obviously the Gemara, the Talmud Bavli, which does talk about this. The Gemara Bavli, which was some 700 years after the events of the Chashmonaim, writes exclusively about the Pach Hashemen. And it seems that it takes this idea from the Megillah Ta'anit and only uses that, and the rest of the Megillah Tanit totally ignores. Talks about the Pach HaShemen and the miracle that occurred, and what we have to do, what to light, which oils we light, etc. Something very similar to which is brought down into the Shulchan Aruch, into the code of Jewish laws. If you look at other Rishonim like the Rambam does mention the idea of the wars against the Yevanim, but it then goes on to tell us about the various laws of Hanukkah, the oils, etc., things that we saw before. So I don't think that when we look at the holiday of Hanukkah, it would be a great stretch to put our emphasis over here is that the Talmud and the Chachamim place their emphasis on the oil as opposed to the war against the Greeks, in order to pacify the nations of the world, and not to have it on the front banner that, hey, we had a great victory against you, we destroyed the Yevanim, we destroyed the Greeks, and we're putting it into your face. So in order to lower that, to find, so to speak, favor in the eyes of the world, we place our emphasis dafker on the idea of the Pach HaShemen and not on the emphasis of the wars. But I think it's important that the Jewish people remember that in essence, the great miracles that occurred during the wars, which took place over many years, was obviously a tremendous miracle, not less than the tremendousness of the Pach HaShemen which was found. And we should have that emphasis in front of our eyes when we celebrate the festival of life in Hanukkah. A chelik Hanukkah to everybody.
Eshakach, thank you very much.
Okay.
We'll continue on Sunday. Thank you, everybody.